Hello, everyone. Welcome to this interactive Power Hour panel discussion from Harbinger. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you, depending upon whichever part of the world you are joining in today. And thank you very much for taking the time out to join this conversation with us. So we'll give it another 10 seconds or so for attendees and participants to join in, and then we could get started with today's discussion. So today, primarily, we are going to talk about embracing the future of education with micro-credentials and job boards. And before we get started, there are a few housekeeping tips. I'll play this video, and then you can listen into the housekeeping tips.
Welcome to Harbinger's flagship interactive webinar, Power Hour.
Ensure you have selected the right speaker for audio output. Test your speaker to ensure it is working fine from the audio settings option on the lower left corner of your screen. If necessary, dial in using phone.
Let's tune in.
All right. So my name is Rahul. I'll be your host for today. I work as a senior director at Harbinger Group, and primarily I'm passionate about intervention of technology to make education accessible and equitable for all. And that's one of the key things that we are going to touch upon today. And with that, with no further delay, let me invite the esteemed panelists for today's discussion. The first panelist that we have today is David Jones, founder and CEO of Visible. Good morning, David. Thank you very much for joining us today for this conversation.
Hi, good morning. Thanks for inviting me. Excited to be here. Thank you very much.
David, if you could please talk a little bit about yourself and briefly about your organization, just so that the audience can know you a little better.
Absolutely. So Visible came about, we started designing digital credentials for cybersecurity about 3 or 4 years ago, and it blossomed from creating digital badges for cybersecurity into a full-blown web application. So currently what we do is the entire implementation from designing the micro-credentials or digital badges to the software that a company would use to issue those badges to learners. So that's a little bit about the company. The cool thing about it is you can take the platform and deploy it on-prem or on cloud. So that's one of the big differentiators with our software versus the competition. I'm passionate about digital credentials, education, and definitely, as you mentioned before, Rahul, equality in education and ed tech. So a little bit about me, and thank you again for the invitation.
Right. No, thank you, David. This is very exciting, and yes, I know pretty much that you're very much passionate about micro-credentials, and there's a lot of buzz and talk about micro-credentials, especially in the higher education domain and also in the workforce development domain. So it will be very interesting to have this conversation today and to get to know your thoughts in terms of how micro-credentials can play a big role in the future of education.
Absolutely.
And now let me take the opportunity to invite our second panelist for today. We have Kevin Pitts with us. Kevin is the president at PCG LLC. Hey, good morning, Kevin. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Good morning. Good morning. Thanks for inviting me.
Right. So, Kevin, could you please talk a little bit about yourself, your professional background, and what do you do in the current role, and what kind of roles have you played in the higher education domain?
Yeah, so let me start with the higher education domain. I worked at University of Michigan, the Ross School of Business in the executive education sphere, also Duke Corporate Education, an organization affiliated with Duke University, and Stevens Institute of Technology, which is one of the premier technology universities, along with MIT and others in the world. My organization, pretty much is your typical traditional OD consulting organization working with leaders to make better decisions practically. Yet we also have been using computer-based technology, computer-based simulations to affect these better decisions, as we certainly believe that adults learn by doing, and give them a risk-free environment to make decisions. And so I'm excited to talk about microcredentials, and just got a lot of passion about some of those things. And so can't wait to hear from the audience too, their questions.
Absolutely. And thank you very much, Kevin. You have a pretty rich experience and background in the higher education domain. And I think you've picked up on a very important point around executive leadership development. That's a big talent gap or a talent shortage area these days. And some of the organizations that you mentioned, Duke Corporate Education and Michigan Ross School of Business, they're doing some great stuff in this area. And you rightly mentioned, I recall, when Skillsoft came into picture, maybe 15 years, 20 years back, when, Cisco certifications and Microsoft certifications were the need of the hour, CCNA and SQL and database and servers and all that stuff. So IT infrastructure was at a boom. This was right after Y2K happened. So Skillsoft became a very prominent skill development platform. And they would typically create these virtual labs. And the concept was, give the technician, the IT person, a risk-free environment to learn how to, do the stuff, so that they don't get into the actual server room and just blow up the servers apart, or rather do something. So it's very interesting to hear from you that, maybe 1.5 decades back, we were talking about giving risk-free environments to IT infrastructure engineers. Now we are talking about giving a risk-free environment to business decision makers, CXO level people. And business simulations are great. I think a lot of these organizations does, right? Harvard does it, that they would give you a particular business case, business scenario, they'll give you some budget, and they'll say that, okay, now you have to manage the profit and loss of this organization by making the right decisions and all. So interesting topic. If you give them a risk-free environment, if they get it right, you give them a verifiable digital credential, which they can, kind of validates that, okay, these guys are capable and good enough to make decisions. So I'm sure this discussion is going to be very exciting and very interesting. So glad to have you both once again, David and Kevin, on this platform. And as Kevin mentioned, we would definitely like this to be an interactive session. At any point of time, if anyone in the audience, if you have any thoughts, questions, or comments, feel free to type in the chat box or in the Q&A. And if you want to, share something, or if you want to speak something, just raise your hand or type it in the chat. We would arrange for you to get unmuted so that you can share your thoughts. So we'd love this to be an interactive one and know your thoughts on these topics. Right. So what are we going to talk about today? What's our game plan for today? So firstly, we are going to touch upon what is the need for implementing digital micro-credentialing in higher education space? Why is there so much talk about this? Why are people talking about this suddenly so much? And once we have kind of understood or answered or addressed the why question, then we'll move on to the how part in terms of how to implement micro-credentialing. What's the starting point? Is it a very big lift? Where does the thought process starts from? Then third part is, artificial intelligence. We know that, we are living in the times when artificial intelligence is a companion for anything and everything that we do, right from the food that we order, right from the clothes that we buy, right from the degree and certificate programs that we decide to learn, right from the jobs that we decide to take. So now is the time. If ever there was a time to implement AI or leverage AI to benefit the human society to a great extent, we are living in that decade for sure. And last one is that how employers and higher education system can benefit together with data-driven decision making. And we'll talk about that in detail and how artificial intelligence can play a role there. So I had been thinking through this for quite a long time in terms of, and right from my college days as well, right? All of us have gone through the higher education system, or most of us would have gone through the higher education system. And in our times, what it was told is, and this is, I'm just talking about 2 decades back, what we were told was you need to have a college degree to be successful in life. It doesn't matter what you're good at and what you're not good at, unless and until you do not have a college degree, you would probably not be successful in life. That's what we were told by our communities, our parents, our social peers, and everyone, our education system. And employers also. They said that, you need to have an MBA degree or you need to have a certain degree to qualify for this job. But suddenly there is and Josh Bersin had kind of claimed this 2 to 3 years back, the HR tech guru, that in the coming years, and this was before COVID, and no one had predicted that COVID would happen and suddenly there would be so much talent shortage, talent gap in the world. Josh Bersin had clearly predicted that, I still remember he had written an article which said there would be a talent war that will happen in the next few years. Companies, organizations, employers will fight with each other to retain talent, attract talent. And that's a reality today. Yeah, one thing that we can say that COVID accelerated that trend, but that trend is definitely there. Every organization is willing to spend money to retain the right set of talent and to acquire the right set of talent from the market. So this recession or no recession, there are just so many options available for the employees these days. So that's where a lot of these organizations like Amazons and Googles of the world, they started making this shift. They were kind of the pioneers who said that, I think Amazon was the first one who said that we are okay hiring for skills rather than degrees. It's okay if you don't have a degree. And that's where I found this quote very interesting. It's from the Upwork CEO. They've done some great work, some great research work in terms of how the shift is happening for skills versus degrees. He says too often degrees are still thought of as lifelong stamps of professional competency. And that's a very big statement in itself. And that kinds of, I'm hoping that it will resonate with most of us in this room who have been through that period, who have done their education like a couple of decades back or 3 decades back. They tend to create a false sense of security, perpetuating the illusion that work. So a false sense of security is something which works very heavily on the human psychology. And the knowledge it requires is static, it's not. So these are some, very interesting comments that he has made. Then I was reading another report from World Economic Forum, and it says 65% children entering primary school today will end up in jobs that don't yet exist. And this from World Economic Forum. And this is definitely a scary situation. So it primarily means the higher education system, or rather even the primary education system does not knows that what kind of education that they have to provide to these kids to be ready for the future workplaces. And that's where this entire concept of that 4-year degree or a 3-year degree is getting a little irrelevant. So what you need to have is the right set of skill sets to be able to be successful in the new world, in the future of workplace. There could be multiple business drivers, but technically, if we look at it, there are 2 key factors, 2 key business drivers for skill-based hiring. One is the technology is involving or innovating, which is disrupting the nature of jobs. ChatGPT, it has just changed the way people work. Now, honestly speaking, there would be so many different type of job roles which would become redundant because of ChatGPT. And people who are not able to leverage technology or use technology, they will also fall behind in the race. So the technology innovation, that's one key driver. And the second one is, I think the traditional education system has struggled to keep pace with these changes because And it's not their fault as well. If they don't know what the future of work would look like, how are they going to change it? And they cannot change it overnight. It has to be an incremental change. So there has to be a constant dialogue between the employers and the higher education system, because they are, they are into a take and give relationship. And both these reasons are contributing to a bigger factor, which is a bigger business driver. Because at the end of the day, if Amazons and Googles and other employers of the world start saying that, okay, we are okay to hire for skills versus degrees, then the shift is definitely happening and it will continue to happen. So at this point of time, I would kind of like to invite David here. And David, I'll request you to kind of share your thoughts in terms of, will this shift that we are talking about, skills versus degrees, help in reducing the talent shortage that we are experiencing for the workplaces of future?
Absolutely. So thanks for keying it up. When we were talking kind of before the meeting, I said that I jotted down a couple of notes. So I'll try not to make it obvious that I'm reading a little bit, but to summarize in a short answer, yes, I think primarily by enabling learning providers to offer more agile, skill-based curriculums, and by empowering learners to acquire just-in-time or on-demand work-ready skills that meet the job requirements without over-educating. So I think in simple terms, yes, it will help reduce the talent shortage. Learning providers, you mentioned the traditional system a lot, and one thing that we're seeing is hybrid systems where you can go into a traditional college or university, and inside your degree program, they offer micro-credential specializations, so that even if you don't complete your degree, you still walk away with something that shows you have these specific skills. I think hybrid systems in traditional education, as well as standalone education providers in the form of boot camps and similar learning institutions, all contribute to helping reduce that talent shortage, which will help reduce, help fill those needs and replace the shortage.
Right. Thanks, David. That's a very interesting point that you brought up. And Kevin, I'll kind of try to put this question to you, and considering the fact that you come from a higher education background. So there's also a lot of talk about student debt in the US higher education system. And it's probably one of the biggest reasons that why people are not able to complete their entire education pathway, and they drop off. So dropping off students in between student debts is another big factor. So the question is that if it becomes a situation wherein a person has enrolled for a 4-year degree program, and because of certain financial reasons that individual is not able to complete the 4-year degree, but let's say he or she has done a couple of semesters, and through those semesters he or she has acquired some skills, and those skills are being verified by a digital credential. Would that be a good situation both for the college and the student, or how does it shapes up? What are your thoughts on that?
So let me first talk about this talent shortage shift, and then I'll answer the question. I think what's really driving the talent shortage is really the notion that this war for talent is real. And what I find people doing and organizations are rethinking their paradigm, rethinking their assumptions. So I know of a hospital who required a bachelor's degree for almost all jobs at the hospital, and then began in this war for talent to think about, okay, is that really the need? Have we gone overboard with this requirement of having a bachelor's degree for a quote unquote janitor that is going to sweep our halls for us? By the way, a very important job because it keeps things clean, and patients want a clean place. but does this person need a bachelor's degree to do that? So I think what's really driving, what's another aspect of what's driving the solution to the shortage is just the rethinking of our assumptions and our beliefs and our paradigms that we cultivated over many, many years. So now let me go to your question. So this individual that leaves school because of debt, and I hope you're not asking me to solve the debt conversation. I got opinions to solve that. That's a longer conversation what we have today.
Right.
And then they leave, and is it okay? And should employers kind of discount this person as they begin their career? I don't think so. I think that, well, first, is it good for the schools? If the schools are measured on graduation rates, and they are for various different, like U.S. News and World Reports, or what is it, Poets and Constant Poets, or one of these other assessment agencies, then it hurts, right? Because graduating is kind of important in the traditional sense of schooling. And I think for families in general, I mean, if you send your child to school, you want them to graduate, right? That's something that I think is a goal. But if they don't, will they be placed in a category that says they are unemployable? And I don't think that's the case. I think that more and more people are recognizing if you can show proof that you have a certain skill, whether it's through a certification or certificates, or even just presenting your transcript, that this war for talent is very real, and people are making exceptions to the rule, if not creating different policies, so this person could be hired and begin their career process. So does it hurt the schools? Depending on how the schools are measured. Does it hurt the individual? Depends on what kind of job that they're going for.
Right.
I hope we talk a little bit about, what is the role of college education? So I never saw it to be getting the degree itself, even though the degree is kind of affirmation. There's some critical thinking skills that people, when they go to college, and some interpersonal skills when you're dealing with people as adults and not like, teenagers or children, adolescents, that you're going to need when you go to work. And so the question is, even if we said, hey, college is not that important, where are you going to get these skills from? And college plays a real big role in maturing young adults from an interpersonal dynamic, and then obviously from a critical thinking point of view, whether you're thinking about philosophy, mathematics, or science, there's a critical thinking thing that I think this degree kind of historically bestowed on the individual when he went to apply for a job.
No, absolutely. You have touched upon a very important point, Kevin, and thank you very much for sharing that. In fact, even the future workplaces, when they talk about the skills and all those things, they rate this very high: critical thinking, analytical thinking, interpersonal skills. So there's a lot of emphasis on in terms of how this soft skills have taken a center stage. Because see, if it's about technical skills, you can probably learn in college, you can learn during an internship program, or you can learn while on the job. But some of these things are very important. And we'll talk about that later in the conversation today, that how that information needs to be fed back into the higher education system, and how we can relook at redesigning the curriculums that we have in that space. And in fact, actually, this point brings us pretty close to a question that one of our attendees have asked Veronica. And the question is, I'd like to know what factors the panelists consider when they are hiring talent. So a portion of it, Kevin, you have already answered, but if you want to kind of elaborate a little bit on it, and then followed by David. If you want to share your thoughts on this, please go ahead.
Absolutely.
So, I look for what is it that is needed in the organization itself, right? What are our needs? And in many organizations around the world, right, there's already a paradigm there. There's already a kind of a history. And yet you have to look to the future to see where the future is going. So I'll just give you a quick example. I led a organization development group, and my senior leader told me, Kevin, we're going to have to do a lot of training and facilitation because of what they were trying to execute on, which was something called just culture. And so I had an open position, and so and it was an open position though on the organization development side that does coaching and consulting, not on the learning and development side, which does training and facilitating workshops. So, I repurposed the organization development opening to be a learning and development job. So obviously, internally in companies, you got to go through some things to repurpose that. But because it wasn't an extra FTE, it was no problem to repurpose that so that this person would be available. And who we're looking for is somebody who can do a lot of training and facilitation that was coming down from senior leaders. Yet my team said, well, Kevin, we need some instructional design skills, not only, facilitation and training. And so, matter of fact, we would place the instructional design and technology a little bit more important than just doing the training. We'll teach them how to do the training. They need to have some technology, instructional design skills, e-learning, web-based skills. And so they actually changed my mind, because I was thinking about just get a trainer and let them train, but because that's what senior leaders were pretty much focused on. But yet when I looked into the future, we certainly needed somebody who can bring some e-learning, instructional design, technology skills to the table to be more consistent to where things are going in the future. And so it's, I look at the future and I look at the basic need and I go and try and find that individual. Whether you had a bachelor's degree or not, or a master's degree was less important than, whether you had that skill. Now, by the way, though, we have a paradigm in this particular organization I was talking about. They wanted you to have a bachelor's degree, this hospital, right? So I had to work within that paradigm, but I could have got an exception if I needed to.
Right. So
Very good.
yeah, go ahead, David.
For me, you look for a couple of things. You look for practical experience and you look for verified skills or certs. Years and years ago, the first thing that you would look for is education and, how long did you go to school? Do you have a bachelor's degree? Do you have a master's degree, et cetera? I think now modern workforces are we're more focused on, do you have work-ready skills? Can you validate or can you verify that you have these skills? And if you can, in a lot of cases, you're a good match for the opening. So those are things that I look for. I think if you're in a perfect world, it would be great to have a mix of formal education, because sometimes we discount formal education, but those degrees still carry a lot of weight. Those degrees still mean you finished, the process of completing 4 years, 6 years, 8 years, and you have accomplished something. So they still have value. In a lot of cases, if you have a good mix of formal education plus verifiable skills, that's probably a best case scenario. But definitely a lot of weight goes to if you can start a job and contribute immediately, that carries a lot of weight.
Right. Thank you. Thanks, David. Thanks, Kevin. Once again, I think what we are talking is the emphasis is on the right skill sets rather than degrees. Yes, education is of paramount importance, but it should not become a barrier. But other than that, other than the skills, we also have to make sure that, the person fits into the environment, in the organization, in the culture of the organization, and those things. All right, so this was interesting, the discussion about the shift. So we'll move ahead. Go ahead.
To that point, in terms of if they will fit, that's a good point. And I know you're talking about soft skills a little bit later on, but that's a great point. Beyond the skills, will they fit into the culture? Do they have these soft skills? And I'm glad that it's part of the agenda because it's very important as well.
Right, absolutely. Right, so moving ahead, we'll talk, we'll further discuss about this talent war thing. I think we see there's a lot of mismatch globally in terms of what our education system is giving to the community, to the society, and what the employers are looking for. So there's always news that, okay, I was reading a report earlier that there's a shortage of 80,000 odd truck drivers in the US. And there are specific skilling companies who are working in this domain. They're racing against time to fulfill that shortage. Again, there was a Forbes article which was on nurses. So it said that there's a huge population of nurses in the US who will be retiring in a specific window of time, and that could be a healthcare crunch situation. But then there are all these colleges, universities, community colleges, and education systems which offer various kind of degree programs, certification programs, and skilling programs. But why are they not be, and there's an unemployment rate as well, which is continuously increasing. So there's a talent shortage. So there are jobs available. The education system is there. We have sufficient colleges and universities and education systems in place to prepare the workforce of the future. But those workforce of the future, or the workforce that they are producing, is not being consumed by the employers. So the mismatches, and some of this again goes and ties back to our earlier discussion that we are having, that okay, they might have the core technical skills or the hardcore skills, but they might not have the soft skills which are required in the workplace of the future. So this again, World Economic Forum, LinkedIn, and others, they have done this surveys. So 92% of executives think that their employees aren't skilled enough to do their jobs. That's a huge number, 92%. Like, what are we left with? 8%? I don't know where's that number coming from. Less than a third of companies believe they have the talent necessary for digital transformation in their organizations. So no one is untouched, be it manufacturing, supply and logistics, healthcare, banking and finance, insurance. Every industry is going through a rapid phase of digital transformation. But they feel that to be able to, make it to the end point of the digital transformation, they do not have the right set of talent. 59% of hiring managers have problems finding and hiring employees with soft skills. Right? This is a validation of our discussion that we are having, that they're not able to validate. Now, again, there could be a counterpoint to this, that what if the managers are having some sort of unconscious bias towards hiring, if they're not able to really identify whether these individuals have the right set of skill sets or not? It can be an individual problem as well. And probably that's where a verifiable digital micro-credential can come into picture. But yeah, these are the stats in terms of the mismatch. So again, David, starting with you, what do you yeah, go ahead.
Yep. Just to capture one thing that you said a couple of minutes ago, bias. There is a lot of bias, unconscious bias and non-unconscious bias that happens a lot of times from conversations with hiring managers. I've identified a lot of bias where qualified candidates are weeded out of the process. So that is a big word that you mentioned. It's a small word, but it plays a huge role a lot of times in this candidacy's journey to employment. So I wanted to harp on that a little bit. So just going back to the notes that I wrote earlier, the first thing I want to say is 92% is a staggering, it's a huge number. When I looked at the slides earlier, I couldn't believe it because like you said, it only reads 8%, like 92% is a staggering number. Perhaps it's an indication of a bigger issue in which the candidates being hired meet the requirements, but don't possess the functional skills necessary for the job. Another thing that you mentioned earlier was soft skills. So they meet the basic functional requirements, but they're missing maybe some of those soft skills that would make them more successful. A couple of things also that I think play a role in that mismatch: personnel, as we spoke about a little bit, bias. A lot of times your personnel can have bias. Sometimes it could be a result of the technology itself. Technology, there's been a lot of reports that show, even from a software perspective, software is programmed by other people, and sometimes we've identified bias even with the software. And then there's a matter of, I call it equal opportunity, where everyone does not have the same access and the same opportunities when it comes to positions. A lot of times these guys may make it through the first round or the second round of the weeding out process when going for a job, but a lot of times the hiring manager, being biased, will make a decision and say, well, this candidate, and this has come up with me before in a conversation, has said, well, this candidate lives 40 miles away, so it may be a problem with them getting to work on time, or this candidate has family obligations. So a lot of times the hiring manager will make an arbitrary decision that really did not have to be made and eliminate a good candidate from an opportunity. So I think those are a couple of factors that are worth noting.
Right.
All right, shall I go?
Yes, go ahead, Kevin, please.
Yeah, so before I answer, let me just, I've been putting some stuff in the chat, but I realize I'm chatting to myself and the panelists. Let me answer some of these questions here. Can you define soft skills? Veronica asked. And they're people skills, interpersonal skills such as influencing others, emotional intelligence, conflict management, team building, and things of that nature. You usually see a differentiation between soft skills and business acumen skills or hard skills, which is typically strategy, finance, and marketing. So there's that distinction. And then somebody talked about, organizations that are doing certification programs from colleges and universities. And the Stevens Institute of Technology, one organization that I know does have a certificate program, not certification, two different things. We may touch on them here, but a certificate program that allows you to take maybe 4 out of the 10 or 12 courses that you would use for a degree, but you can apply those to a degree should you go further. And so it certainly is out there, and it's a way to kind of, one, get that specific skill that we're talking about, but two, if you want to go further, it allows you to do that. So let's talk about what are some of the reasons for this mismatch. I just think it's just the evolution of the environment.
Right.
When you think about virtual reality, augmented reality, artificial intelligence, a lot of these leading edge technologies come out of universities, by the way, and it just takes time for corporations to catch up to what's available for use in private industry. And then it takes time for employees to catch up with respect. So it's just a timing mismatch, if you will. But, when I look at my nieces and nephews, they know technology a lot better than I do. And so when they get a working age, they'll be filling some of those roles and filling some of those mismatches pretty easily. So we just have to look at the big picture when we look at this mismatch.
No, that's a very interesting perspective in terms of the mismatches, mostly because of the timing. And yes, what do they call them? They call them the Gen Zs and Gen Alphas, I think, the next generation.
Yeah.
I totally agree with you. I've got a 6-year-old toddler, and believe me, and I'm not a technical. I claim to be a pretty techno savvy guy. I know how to use gadgets and all, and he can use uh, the electronic features, be it in WhatsApp or Amazon Prime or Alexa, better than me. So he would tell me that, okay, you know what? You don't have to go through this circuitous route to complete this activity. You can make 2 clicks here and you'll reach here. And I was zapped. Uh, he's just able to say A to Z complete, but he knows all this stuff. So that's where I agree to a certain extent that, it could be a timing mismatch as well. So we're in for exciting times ahead, going ahead. So interesting. Right. So I'll kind of talk a little bit about this future of education framework. And we'll see that, where does this micro credentials and job boards fill in. So this future of education framework, basically it talks about 4 key components. The first component is the hybrid instruction delivery model. So COVID changed it, and for good reasons. Like now, not necessarily everyone needs to be at the same place, same location in a classroom to attend a lecture. So you can, there could be a virtual campus environment that has been created in Metaverse, and you can join as an avatar in that Metaverse. If you don't want to go to the campus on a particular day, you'll have your peers, so you can have the social networking as well. And you'll have an avatar of the lecturer or the faculty as well in the Metaverse environment. And you'll not feel left out as well. Because see, typically what happens is when we talk about blended working environment, there could be 10 people who are sitting in a conference room in office, and there could be two chaps who would be sitting there on the Zoom, and suddenly everyone in the room forgets that, okay, there are 2 people sitting on the Zoom as well, and they start cracking jokes amongst themselves. So you start feeling left out, you start feeling socially disconnected, and that's where you might not want to contribute to the discussions. And in the education perspective, it's very important for the students to stay connected. So that's, the hybrid instructional delivery models, that's where it comes. Now, curriculum redesign is an interesting aspect. I'll give you a use case. There is a lot of talk about green and clean energy. So this electric vehicles, the entire globe is moving towards, this green and clean energy, renewable energy. But do we have enough technicians who can handle this electric vehicles repairs, maintenance, and all those things? In Europe, actually, the Euro Union has come up with a concept called EBA. I don't recall the full form, but the concept of why that it's basically an organization, and it's I think it's Electronic Battery Alliances. So they are creating an ecosystem to scale the next generation workforce who can handle this electric vehicles demands, maintenance, and all those things. So when we talk about curriculum redesign, what employers want, right from technical skills to soft skills, that information needs to be fed back into the higher education system. And then the curriculum needs to be relooked at, that, okay, what do we need to do to bring in critical reasoning, analytical thinking, decision-making, leadership skills as part of the curriculum? Or if they're already there, are they too dated? Do they meet the current environment's context? Third component is emphasis on skills over degrees. We have already spoken a lot about this in detail, and this is where the micro credentials come into picture. For example, there are a lot of skills. For example, someone in the audience asked that, how do you define soft skills, right? Similarly, one question could be that, how do you rate soft skills? In a 30-minute conversation, are you going to clearly analyze, or would you be able to analyze that, okay, if it's only limited to communication skills, how can you speak? How well can you speak? How well can you write? That's okay. But critical thinking, analytical thinking, reasoning capabilities, it's not that easy. So that's where this verifiable credentials come into picture. And then mapping the job seekers with open opportunities. Now, this is a big question that I want to pose to this forum. Is it the time, like the higher education has started adopting the micro-credentials to a certain extent? I haven't seen much talk about adopting job boards. So should job boards be an integral part of an higher education ecosystem? So for example, today you have a Salesforce, which acts as a CRM for enrollment management, admission management. Then you have a student information system who takes care of a lot of things. Then you have a learning management system. Then you have an alum relationship management system. So there are all these systems which constitute the higher education ecosystem. Similarly, should job boards be by default, should they be part of the higher education ecosystem? So post this, I think I'll go back to David. And David, if you can kind of briefly explain in terms of, let's say if there's an education institute, a college or a university who wants to implement micro-credentials, then in very simple terms, leaving the tech aside, in terms of what is the definition of a micro-credential and how can we go about implementing it?
So there's a lot of different descriptions, so I'll try not to get in trouble. So one definition is micro meaning small, credential meaning a qualification. And one thing that you'll see commonly is a micro credential is associated with a digital badge or a digital credential to represent the accomplishment. So there's literally dozens and dozens of definitions. So I'll try to keep it general and a little generic, but basically you're talking about a small bite of learning, and a lot of times it's associated with a digital badge or a digital credential to represent the overall experience. So in terms of implementation, there's lots of systems out there that will allow you to implement a digital credentialing system. My company builds them, but of course there's larger players out there like the Credleys and the Badgers of the world that have been around for a really long time and that excel in that area as well. So a lot of colleges and universities, step one is usually kind of developing the taxonomy, identifying what you want in terms of criteria, and then developing that system based on the specific rules or regulations that the university has. So that is, some of the fundamental things that need to be in place to get going. So like I said, there's a lot of different systems that you can use. One thing that is important, as you mentioned, we were in the green room before the general discussion, is adoption and making sure that basically this means something to the employers, this means something to the learners, this means something to the people that are issuing those digital badges. It has to be mobile, it has to be credible before the people will readily adopt this technology. So one thing that we do and a lot of other companies do is use a standard like open badges. We're a member of One EdTech, so our software goes by the standards that One EdTech uses for open badge compatibility and compliance. So we're certified, and we work with a lot of partners and institutions that are not just saying, I want something that looks pretty, but are saying, I want to future-proof this micro-credential so that in 5 years, in 10 years, it still means something. In 5 years, if the student wants to move it to a centralized wallet, any of these other organizations that also use this similar technology, they're all compatible, so I can move that credential from one wallet to the next. And the learner that puts the power in the hands of the learner so that they know this credential that I earned, it means something and I can always access it. So those are important things to think about. We partner with companies like Velocity Career Labs that do a lot with wallets, but basically companies that realize for adoption to take place, that these digital credentials, these micro credentials, they have to abide by a standard, and we have to do our part to drive adoption by making sure that everybody's on the same page, from the learners to the issuers to the employers, that will ultimately review those as a deciding factor in whether to hire a candidate or not.
Thanks, David. Kevin, you've been in the higher education system for long. So are there any kind of advice that you want to give to our audience from the higher education space, that should they be looking at micro-credentials as an option which allows their students to get placed for skills versus degrees, or any thoughts or suggestions on this point?
To the extent that micro-credentials augment what higher education is doing, I certainly would say do that. We've got a lot of people in our university, typically those that are employed by organizations, who come back to school part-time. So at the Stevens Institute of Technology, there is a operationally excellence certificate that you can get. 3 or 4 programs out of our operationally excellent research platform that you can take and then more or less be certified from an operationally excellent point of view around supply chain and things of that nature. So we see more people doing that versus getting a master's degree. Like you get your bachelor's and now you're thinking about a master's, but now you go, oh, I got an option to do this certificate in the same university with the professors that are doing the research, the leading edge research in the area. And some folks are opting for that. We'll call it micro-credential. And I see it to be enhancing of your career. We've seen people get promoted by doing these micro-credentials during, after they get their bachelor's, but prior to getting a master's degree, if that's what they want to do. And it really helps, help you go deep in a certain skill. Now, here's what you got to also remember too. As you move up in an organization, if that's what you want to do, deep skills are less important. We talked about the interpersonal skills that are much more important as you become a VP and you're just sitting in meetings. You're not doing anything. You're sitting in meetings and identifying the direction of the future. You're not, if you're a VP of manufacturing, you're not running the machines.
Right.
You're giving the policy or the direction of what you need to do, and others are doing it. So, if that's where you want to go in an organization, just getting deep-seated knowledge in something can help when you are younger, but you may not use those skills when you're older. And there are other skills you might need in order to be effective as a leader in an organization. Now, if you just want to be an individual contributor and you want to be the best individual contributor in an organization, going deep in any one skill and any one credential is helpful. But you really got to think about this holistically and where you want to go in your future as you venture out to them. I will say this though, certain organizations like the International Coaching Federation and PMI, Project Management Institute, they've done a wonderful job with industry to basically confer what I want to put, I don't want to say accreditation, but credit worthiness of those certifications, and they certainly carry a lot of weight in many organizations around the world.
Right. Thank you, Kevin. That's very insightful, and I just realized that we are coming to the top of the hour and we have a few slides left. This was a very interesting conversation. Maybe we'll have to do a follow-up for this as well. Just in the interest of the time, I would request the audience, if you have any questions, thoughts, comments, just please feel free to put it in the chat box. If you're not able to answer them during the discussion today, we'll respond by email. And while we move ahead in the discussion, David and Kevin, if you want to put in your email IDs in the chat box for the audience, if they want to reach out to you for any specific questions, comments, and thoughts, please feel free to do so. So I think, should higher education integrate job boards as an integral component of the ecosystem? This is a question, but before taking this question, I'll probably kind of talk a little bit about this slide in terms of role of AI to map jobs, and that would probably allow us to make a decision whether this can happen or not. So just to simplify this, it's a complex model, but just to simplify this, let's say there are there's this higher education ecosystem and there's employers, and in between sitting there is job boards. The key is, seamless flow of data from one party to the other party, which helps in data-driven decision making. For example, let's say that the automotive association or the automotive body in the US wants certain specific skill sets for their workplaces at different levels. So that kind of information should be fed back into the higher education system. So all the colleges, universities, community colleges who are providing certification degree and apprenticeship programs on automotive technicians or job roles, they would map these requirements with their existing curriculum and see where the gap is. And then those gaps need to be filled in. And this kind of ties back to our future of education framework. This is the curriculum redesign part. So there can be immense amount of data that will be coming in, and then there's a lot of analysis, and this is not humanly possible. Of course, it's possible, but it can take months, years. That's where data AI comes into picture. So you can create data models, and you can run these algorithms against these data models. And with ChatGPT experience, we all know that what level of accuracy AI can reach if the data models have been trained properly. Then again, there's this information flow between higher education ecosystem and employers. It makes it easier. So for example, increasing enrollments is a big challenge right now for the higher education ecosystem in the US. So and I've never ever seen the marketing teams in the higher education ecosystem getting such a big seat at the center table of discussion, that because they're kind of driving the business, because enrollments will decide whether this college continues to function or not. It's kind of the retail story that happened, a decade back, the restaurant story, that, there's so much churn in that business. So, so when the student shows up on a website of a college or is looking for a particular program or this thing, if he or she is able to get to know that where will they end up after this 2-year program or a 4-year program, what kind of job will they get, what kind of salary range, pay range would they get, which area geographically will they get placed in, and then they can make those wise decisions in terms of choosing the right set of programs and all. So that level of data flow that we are talking about, and that's where we can leverage AI. And having said that, just want a quick closing comments, both from you, David and Kevin, in terms of where do you see, embracing the future of education with micro-credentials and job boards? I mean, do you strongly agree, disagree, or it's just a good to have thing, it's just a buzzword, but, any thoughts and suggestions on that? Final words.
I strongly agree. I think that integrating job boards is part of the future. I know a couple of colleges that are already doing this because it's a good practice, and basically kids and adults and learners are in school with the end goal to be employable or to advance in their current field. So tying the education to a job board, to employers, is practical. I think that practice will continue, and it's a great idea. Integrating and using technology like machine language and AI is a great idea. It saves time and effort on both ends, and it's practical. I love the diagram that you had before where the job board is in the middle. That's exceptional, and it gives a very vivid picture of the flow that a lot of colleges use. So in summary, I do see it currently being used, and I think it will continue to gain traction with other colleges and universities, in addition to using it in conjunction with AI and machine learning.
Right. Thanks, David. Kevin, your final thoughts, comments on this?
Yes, I agree with the job board situation. I find that in the colleges, there are a small number of companies that pretty much buy the talent, right? Other companies can't pay a certain amount that JP Morgan can pay. So they come in and they buy the talent.
Right.
I think a job board would, in a different form, not in its current form, but in a different form, can highlight the benefits of other employers. And I think it would be a great benefit for the whole ecosystem.
Right. So thanks, Kevin. And we have a question here. So I'll read out the question, and Kevin and David, if any one of you want to answer this. The question is, I want to know, will employers prefer micro-credentials over degrees in the future? It seems higher education is more important for researchers over the actual workforce. I would say great question, very intriguing question.
Not in my lifetime. I'm somewhat old, but I think the paradigm shift, just think about, when you have to change the beliefs of an institutional body, right? Takes a long time. Just changing personal beliefs, what I believe, what you believe to be true, takes a long time. This will be a long time coming.
So I disagree. I think it will happen in our lifetime. If you look at the trajectory of micro-credentials from a couple of years ago to now, there was a report that was released last year that said in the US alone, there are over 100,000 individual micro-credential programs, including colleges and universities. If we look at the adoption rate, if we look at the direction that they're going, personal stories, even from my customers. A good example is one of my customers is Level Up in Tech. They're a boot camp. They implemented a micro-credential program a little bit over a year ago. If you look at their hiring rate and the level of hires that they have from people coming in with no technical experience going directly into six-figure jobs, it's a compelling argument. So I disagree firmly. I think it is something that in our life between people with micro-credentials going head-to-head over job opportunities with people with traditional degrees. I think that it will happen in the near future, not even in 20 years. I think within the next 5 years, because that is those are the trends, the realistic trends that I'm seeing.
Thanks, David, for calling me very young. I happen to be 92.
All right, this is just a very interesting discussion. I think we agree to disagree, and that's kind of a validation of a very insightful and interesting conversation. There's this last one question that I want to take. I know we are already over 7 minutes of time, and this is a very interesting one. I'll just read this out. This is one that will let our panelists use their imagination. Okay. In one of your slides, you said there are many jobs that our kids will get that do not exist today. What do the panelists feel those future jobs might look like? Okay, that's a tricky one. I think in my part of world, what comes to my mind is driving air taxis. Could that be one of the future jobs?
Yeah, I mean, something that might be even shorter term because of all the regulations in air taxis. Just a chat GPT specialist.
Yeah, absolutely. If you can't use
You stole
ChatGPT,
my thunder, Kevin. You stole my thunder, man. We think alike.
Hey, I'm just 92, man. Listen.
I think very
Yeah.
soon we'll see a situation wherein the first question that will be asked in an interview is, how would you rate your competency levels with ChatGPT? And what have you achieved with ChatGPT? If you can't use ChatGPT, probably you're not good enough. But yeah, we'll see how the future pans out. But definitely these are very interesting times. Once again, I would like to thank the audience for having this very insightful and interactive conversations with us. Thank you for those chats and questions that you provided. Feel free to reach out to David and Kevin on their email IDs if you have any additional questions. Please feel free to reach out to me at the Harbinger Group website email address. And again, I would like take this time to thank our panelists today, David and Kevin. David, I know you, both of you are kind of running entrepreneurial, startup journeys. So taking time out for these discussions, giving back to the community, that's very important, and really appreciate your time today. Thank you once again, Kevin, David.
Anytime. Call on me
Absolutely.
anytime.
Thanks for inviting me, and I appreciate the commitment to diversity and inclusion. So the panel here is a good representation of that. So always appreciate the invitation. I appreciate, so thank you again very much for that.
Thank you.